Justin McHenry, thank you so much for coming on the show and giving us some of your time. Could you give us a brief biography of yourself, please?
Yeah, so I am a historian and a writer. I have a master's degree in history from West Virginia University, and I work currently as an archivist. So I'm just in the world of history, and I've always been fascinated by, history itself, but also weird things. And so I've really enjoyed just searching out the history of weird things, and that's kind of how I got my start in writing here.
So you've written a new book, Lemuria, A True Story of a Fake Place, which on face value, it looks as though it's like a potted history of the idea of Lemuria, but really upon reading it, it feels more like a sort of history of conspirituality. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, definitely. It kind of morphs into that, and it's really like the entire story of Lemuria gets into how an alternative narrative gets formed. So it starts from one thing, and it gets kind of just churns and churns and churns until it gets turned into like conspiritualness and like this whole marriage between conspiracy and alternative religion and conspirituality and everything else.
Yeah, it's interesting. We should maybe talk a bit about, because we don't. I think we've mentioned it on our other podcast a couple of times, conspirituality, but
Hmm.
it's definitely something that's taken a hold. I mean, we tend to cover the occult from more of the Aleister Crowley end of things, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah.
Not exclusively.
No, but that tends to be, because one thing in the book you sort of broadly use the brush the occult, whereas I feel that there's different versions of the occult, as it were, sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
With very different mindsets, definitely. Whereas, we were talking about this earlier, the kind of what we would call the Western esoteric tradition, which is the kind of Crowley Golden Dawn, that kind of area of occultism is very different to the theosophical New Age version of the occult. And
I mean, some cross fertilization. Yeah, we also. Yeah, I mean, we were making the point. We didn't want to. How did we put it? I wasn't quite sure how that was viewed, and also wanted to present how we are, because I'm an occultist. I identify as an occultist. Saying identify as an occultist sounds very political all of a sudden, doesn't it? but I'm not a conspiracy theorist. Like you, I have a short patience with that. I believe very much in taking health seriously. I've had the vaccine a number of times, and I believe that. As far as lockdown was concerned in the United Kingdom, we're a bit too close to it, a bit too situated to it to make sense of it. So I'm a bit ambiguous about that. So, but that's okay. And and I'm very left of centre. So I don't know if I fit into your idea of what occultist would be like.
We just figured that we should probably get that out of the way first, because we're kind of we're very, I guess, we're quite left, I suppose you'd say, in terms of.
I think also as well, I'm a great believer in the adage we're all ignorant, we're just ignorant in different ways. And I certainly am. I make assumptions, I make gross generalizations, and sometimes I'm aware of it and sometimes I'm not. And that's just part of being human, and that's just part of being kind of situated. We're situated. You're a historian. we're all situated, and we all look at the lens of things now, and we're in the eye of the storm, so we can't really see wood for the trees. And future generations, hopefully, undoubtedly, will wag their fingers at us and say, that little tin god of like the internet, and all the rest of it, or whatever. We can't even imagine what it is, but they will have their opinions, won't they? And they will judge us.
Yeah. So we just wanted to. I think it's kind of important because we obviously our listenership's also, many of them are within that world as well. But we tend to be more on the, I guess, the left-leaning, like Crowley side.
I mean, we're without making a big issue out of it. Without making a drama.
It's just that the book itself, just it kind of. It definitely seems to make a point of the theosophy, definitely, and I agree with this, lean into the right quite a lot. But we just wanted to make clear that
we also we were keen that we wanted to sort of, there was no misunderstanding.
Exactly.
I didn't want to. I wanted to sort of explore those kind of themes with you, but at the same time, I don't want you to go away thinking we're like some right-wing nutjobs.
Yeah.
Well, it's well, just to speak of the occult angle, I think I come at it from a lowercase o occult, and not like uppercase practicing occultist like yourself. And also, yeah, like it's just weird how certain segments of like New Age belief or theosophical stuff have they've really just like diverged from one another, and you do have these two sides, or you even have three sides. You even have like a middle ground between them, but you have very much people like yourselves who are more like attuned to the esoteric world and stuff like that, but who are, you know, perfectly normal individuals going about their days.
I wouldn't go that far.
Well,
I wouldn't go that far.
You're pushing. You're pushing it a bit.
Well, not believing in extremist, but it has morphed into extremist ideas as well, and there's been just searching out for other extremists too. So I think that's where that kind of like conspirituality has come about, where you just have these, you know, far right groups or just alternative people out there searching and searching and searching, and then they find each other and they kind of marry their ideas with one another, and just like marriages of convenience more than anything else.
Yeah.
We relate to this. I was talking to Ken on the way here, and I was saying, well, I mean, maybe I've read this completely wrong as well, but it was like, you know, occultism it is traditionally demonized. It's traditionally demonized by the religious right, is the evangelical right. And yet, but I mean, the sort of one way of reading it, and I'm doing this with the greatest respect, sir, is that you could. It's almost like there's a new demonization. It's like there's you know, the gods of the old religion, the devils of the old religion, the gods of the old religion, the devils of the new. Get it right, Mark. And and the new gods are the gods of enlightened politics and the left and science and reason, almost in a kind of Nietzschean sort of Apollyon sense. And then the irrational, the dark forces of occultism, which are the irrational, destructive side of things, the Dionysian. And it's which also has been lumped in with the right. But anyways, but that again, I'm very happy to be proven wrong, as I often and usually am. But at the same time, I felt it was, and also as well, I'm the reason why I'm sharing that, we've been ventilating it with you, is because I've seriously thought about the book, and I want you to know that I took it seriously. I took it seriously, and I've read nothing else in the last couple of days, and I thought about it and found it immensely entertaining.
It's a very good book.
Its entertainment value is worth the price of admission alone. But that was where that's where I felt a bit uncomfortable or whatever, and that's fine as well, because I like being challenged, and I like being wrong as well.
Well, it speaks to you as just being open-minded, which a lot of the people now, especially in the like conspiracy world and this new age conspiracy tandem that has come around, they're not that open-minded, and they believe what they believe, and it is such a closed system that they cannot accept new ideas coming in, or even questioning or challenging their ideas, and then everything coming from that is like evil and all that.
It's often a castle built on sand, isn't it? Conspiracy thinking. So if you remove, one thing just topples the entire, so they can't almost by design, they can't be wrong, because if one thing's wrong, everything's wrong. The whole thing falls apart. So what they'll do is, if something is proven wrong, and this is something I've noticed, is they'll kind of they'll just sort of ignore it. They'll
Yeah,
just sort of,
yeah.
oh, that didn't happen. Oh, we'll just stop talking about that. There's like, Alex Jones will predict like 50 things, maybe 2 of them will come partially true,
Mhm.
but all the other 48 just say, yeah, we won't look at those anymore.
Well, exactly. A zealot isn't somebody who believes too much. A zealot is somebody who doesn't believe enough. And, dogmatic skepticism, dogmatic belief in anything are the two sides of the same coin, and they feed off each other, don't they? The extremes feed off each other. So
anyway, getting back to the book, so we went off on a bit of a tangent early on.
No, that's right. And I totally respect your response as well. I'm really pleased by that. That's really good. I'm on that.
Yeah. So the thing that struck me early on, straight away, I think within the first chapter, is that you're kind of interested in the people that kind of keep the myth alive almost, and really it's kind of the story about them as much as it is about Lemuria, and that really fascinated me because I've always been interested in the kind of the background, the bit behind the scenes almost of these kind of large myths, and that's kind of really what I mean. Would you agree that that's the kind of
That's a perfect summary of the book. I think is like it's not so much about because Lemuria itself is like I said in the title, a fake place. So it's more about the people who are keeping Lemuria alive and presenting it and using Lemuria as a tool for their ideas and imbuing Lemuria, this lost continent, with any and everything that they themselves hold, and so it's really a story of all of those people and what they did and to Lemuria throughout the generations.
So we should go right back to the beginning and talk about when Lemuria first appears as a concept, and just talk about some lemurs, about the character hanging on the wall behind you.
Yeah. So so it was 1864, I believe. Philip Lutley Schlater, who was a British ornithologist, he was just delivering a paper to the Linnean Society about a review of the mammals of Madagascar, and he was just going through all of the mammals there, and then he finally gets to the lemurs at the end, and he brings up the idea that, okay, there's lemur-like species in South America, there's lemur-like species in Africa, there's lemurs in Madagascar, and there's lemur-like species in India and elsewhere in Asia. So all of these, there has to be something connecting to account for these lemur and lemur-like species. And so he theorized a land bridge once was around just for lemurs. Like it was just like a highway for lemurs. So you were talking about like this, if one thing falls apart, everything falls apart. And so this guy just thought of this one land bridge just to account for lemur migration between the continents. And he called that Lemuria. That was the very last sentence, like a mic drop at the end of his speech there. And he called it Lemuria, and it just stuck. And people, and since it came from a scientific background, I think that gave other scientists the freedom to go about and start using Lemuria itself. And so when they started using it, then that kind of really solidified Lemuria as a scientific idea, and that gave it weight enough for someone like Madame Blavatsky to come through and do what she does with it.
Oh, we'll talk about her. I've got I'm very famously say in other podcasts that Theosophy has a lot to answer for.
Well, I mean, little furry creatures do as well, because I think it's still a mystery how, because the other theory, I mean, like you say, I mean, if there's a landmass there, why is it just lemurs going across?
Mm-hmm.
Why isn't it a fair exchange? There's not, like you say, I think you said there's not like a tall booth there, checking in the lemurs and then and not anything else. But I think the other idea was like a tree or something that somehow like a raft, but then it would take like, how many days would it be? 70 days for it to survive. And then there's like theories about like hibernation, and would it, I mean, I am not a biologist, but it seems like there's a bit of a mystery still there. Intrigued.
Yeah, and that's like from the book itself. That's the greatest mystery still, like surviving about Lemuria is like how the hell did lemurs get onto Madagascar? Because no one knows for sure. No one probably will ever know for sure. But and there's still like discoveries being made today about continental shelf pieces being found in and around Madagascar, elsewhere, like in the islands, kind of in the northern Indian Ocean. So that can kind of make you can hop, skip, and a jump, and it like the oh shoot, the Mozambique Channel there, the Davy Ridge, I believe, is the underground ridge, and it might have been like peaks of that might have been exposed at some point in time, and that would have made it a little bit easier for a raft to land on that, and then maybe another raft to take them from the middle of the Mozambique Channel onto Madagascar. But it's funny because it's a very much a niche scientific area, and all of those niche scientists are like just bickering back and forth with each other about either this sweepstakes rafting idea, or there being some sort of land bridge or exposed islands that lemurs can hop over on, because it's not just lemurs too. Everything that's on Madagascar had to get there somehow. That includes bugs, the birds, and other fauna that's on Madagascar. So it had to get there somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also, I mean, in the Middle Ages, they had these cenophalic men, the men with the dog's heads. And there's a theory, I don't know what you make of it, but there's a theory that the stories of the giant lemur sort of gave birth to that myth, that fable, that there were dog-headed men living in some exotic part of the world. So there's another little bit of Fortean lemur. There's a lot more to say, actually, but so the lemurs have their mysteries.
Yeah, and Madagascar itself is a weird place, just because, like, it's right there off the coast of just a couple hundred miles off the coast of Africa, but apparently human civilization didn't arrive there until the early 80s, and around the time of like Christ's time, and even that you would expect peoples from Africa to be the first to navigate to it, but it was South Pacific
Indonesians, wasn't it?
islanders. Yeah, like Indonesians coming across the Indian Ocean and arriving there, and so it's that's kind of weird in of itself. So it's the land of mystery, really.
Yeah, and one thing I found interesting was you can't even do like fossil records there because of the state of the soil, I think, or is it to do with like humidity or something?
Everything's against like just knowing the history of Madagascar, natural history. It just doesn't want you to know what happened there.
No, I've never been there. I've always been interested in going there. Have you been to Madagascar?
I have not. I would love to, though. It looks like a beautiful place. And,
it looks amazing, doesn't it?
Yeah, and lemurs themselves are like fun little guys too. So it would be interesting to go and see their habitats and everything else.
Yeah, definitely. So when you can't really talk about Lemuria without talking about Atlantis, the two seem sort of like siblings almost, don't they? So, and obviously the first person to really bring up Atlantis was Plato. So should we talk a little bit about kind of Atlantis and maybe move from talking about Plato into, is it Haeckel and Donnelly, because they seem to be the two so let's start with maybe how these two things kind of became intertwined, as it were.
So what I found interesting, just doing a little bit of background on the historiography of Atlantis, was it was first Plato put it into being in two of his dialogues, Critias and Timaeus, and he gives like the normal background, like talking about the place, and then other Greek philosophers and writers, they wouldn't bring up Atlantis per se, but they would bring up their own kind of lost continents, and a couple of them were making fun of Plato's Atlantis, and a couple of them were just theorizing on these other lost places. And then it kind of just died out. Like, it died out for 900, 800 years, and then it wasn't until the Middle Ages or the Renaissance period where you have like Italian monks and whatnot, refinding Plato's works and then translating them into modern, Italian or Latin, and that's led to like a rediscovery in the 15th century, 16th century of Atlantis, and it kind of having a second blooming then. And then, you have people like Olaf Rudbeck, with his Atlantica, really going in hard on like the first real study of what was Atlantis, where was it, and he was, I think he was Swedish, so he of course had he believed Atlantis really was in Sweden. And this guy was like, one of the leading scientists of his day. Newton reached out to him and got a copy of his book and all that kind of stuff. So he was a really well-respected doctor and physician and scientist. And so he was writing about Atlantis, and then it kind of like died out again. And it wasn't until the 19th century with like Jules Verne bringing it up in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And then you have Ignatius Donnelly, an American politician, basically, really studying it and doing the first real hard in-depth look into the like finding out where Atlantis was, and doing this kind of cultural diffusionist approach about describing different places on the earth, and how did this happen, and coming through and really pinpointing where Atlantis could be. And ever since then, it's kind of been in the public zeitgeist because of him.
And it's interesting, like Atlantis, a bit like Lemuria, more so actually than Lemuria. I mean, there's I don't know, you've probably heard of it. There's an American TV channel called Gaia TV. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Yeah.
And Gaia is, to quote Star Wars, a place of scum and villainy. It's well, no, that's a bit rude, I suppose, but it's
not very gentlemanly.
No. But it is. Oh, okay. I'll be nicer about it. But yeah, if you could look on there,
you've got mixed feelings about it.
Yes. But the Atlantis, and more so than Lemuria, actually, is still very much this very prescient kind of concept, isn't it? Within what we used to call the New Age. I don't know this is another thing I was going to ask you. Because we don't really call it the New Age anymore, do we? I mean. You used to see, I don't know how it was in America, but in England we used to have things like New Age fairs, and there'd be like New Age concerts and stuff like that, and they would proudly call themselves New Age. But nowadays it seems to have rebranded itself, and I kind of miss it in a weird way. I used to like those kind of like weird little hippie fairs where you can go and buy occult books and stuff, but they seem to have completely vanished now. So is that the same in the States, or?
It's kind of has rebranded into like metaphysical, I think, has taken over the New Age terminology. I know here in where I live, we have a metaphysical expo every year, and so
is that the one you mentioned in your book?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And so and it's also like New Age was very specifically aimed at certain people's beliefs that were like there was this new age actually going to be coming and rising up, and so I don't think that's a lot of people believe that anymore. So now it's just kind of like a catch-all term for woo-woo ideas and stuff like that. So just
woo-woo is the word we use a lot of the time.
I was going to say, just anything to do with like crystals and
crystals,
and minerals.
We had a real almost like spread like a virus across the country, the crystal shops. In the UK anyway, crystal shops and palmistry. But palmistry at least has a more I don't know,
a bit of a history to it.
A bit of history to it. Yeah. Whereas it's interesting. So
But I would say that's been co-opted into New Age now too. So if you go to a palm reader or even tarot readings, people would say you're in the New Age stuff. That's not true necessarily, but it's just kind of been lumped together.
I think here we have these things called holistic fairs now. I've not been to. I'm going to do a video for the channel actually where we go and see what they're like these days and try and get like a sort of temperature of the temperature reading, as it were, of the sort of people that go there. I've been kind of interested in doing that for a while, but I'm gonna maybe have to do it a little bit low key. But I don't want to get. But yeah,
I suppose it's also quite sort of vanilla and very approachable, isn't it? And that's its greatest strength and weakness as well, because for various reasons.
Yeah, it's easy to sort of get into, but it's not discerning about who it lets in a lot of the time, I think. And and like you talk about in the book, it's very easy for groups like QAnon and stuff like that to be able to kind of co-opt it in. And that's something I'm really interested in as well, is looking at like how those kind of links between occultism or new age stuff and the right wing. I find that kind of fascinating actually. But
but I was going to say the pandemic is the perfect stew for that, just because you have the holistic people who believe in basically very much natural medicine and things like that. And so when the pandemic rolls through and people start telling you have to get vaccines and you have to put these foreign stuff into your body, they're rebelling against that, just like you have these right wingers who don't want the government telling them what to do no matter what. And so that's part of the reason why they find each other and they create friendships and partnerships and stuff.
Yeah, I remember on Twitter, or X as it's now called, lots of people within the occult community being shocked at the New Age community, or the holistic community, whatever they're called now, sort of being so anti-vax. And I was like, really? They've always been. They were sort of anti-vax before it was cool. It was like they've always been anti-vax.
Yeah.
But that's also kind of a misunderstanding. It's a sort of misunderstanding of what holistic means, because by definition, I'm a mental health professional, so within mental health, mental well-being, with mental, you have you can have a very biomedical view of chemicals, and you go to your psychiatrist and he gives you a pill and you're cured, but nobody ever is. If they were, I'd be out of a job immediately. But what you need is and the word holistic, I mean, I wish there was another word, but it's your wellness. It includes things like the 5 ways to well-being, which are, sharing, making meaningful relationships, having a meaningful philosophy to life, actually, immersion in nature, in green nature, and those kind of things. And I mean, for example, to maintain my well-being, I've got to go for a walk 20 minutes every day. If I never do that, if I don't do that, my well-being, my mental health will be impacted. And it's so prosaic saying that, just go for a walk for 20, but actually, but it does always makes a difference. It always tops up my well-being, and medication is essential sometimes, for people who have serious, long and enduring mental health diagnosis like bipolar disorder, paranoid schizophrenia, to maintain that stability, so you can build on it. But it's never just about the pills. It's never just about. It can never be, and that's where I suppose the purely scientific, putting it like that, biomedical view of mental well-being and illness, it sort of falls short. But holistic means that more inclusive, more human, actually.
But I wonder if the term,
rather than rejecting it,
I wonder if the term itself is used differently by different groups of people as well.
Yeah,
that's the way I sort of look at it.
It's not a rejection of medical intervention. It's an acceptance, but at the same time understanding that it's a limited thing. It can take you so far, but not all the way. I suppose that's the best way to think about it.
But anyway, you throw me completely off now.
It was a very relative point I was making.
Well, it just speaks to, I think, the shallowness of some people's beliefs too, like not seeing the entire picture, but just believing in that one certain aspect of it.
It's not nuanced. There's a difference between like alternative medicine and complementary medicine, because you're including those other things as well. And in mental health services, which are social care related, there are lots of that other stuff like going for walks and yoga and all the rest of it to maintain the top up that wellness.
We've become Medicine Weekly. This is
I like this.
And but also keep taking the pills.
Yeah. Anyway, one of the biggest characters in the book, really, I think, and one that obviously crosses over a bit more with the sort of stuff we look into is Helena Blavatsky.
Yeah.
And she's the one that really takes Lemuria and kind of runs with it, isn't she?
Yeah, she
like
does.
in a big way, and has this impact, like this reaching impact that we're still seeing today. You know, there's still groups out there now that are directly sort of affected by Blavatsky's take on Lemuria.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, yeah. So let's talk a bit about Blavatsky, because we've never really done a show about her, which is really interesting. She's come up a lot. And we just assume people know who she is, but perhaps we should just do like a potted bio of Blavatsky and let people know who she is.
She really is one of the most influential people of the 19th century. Like just the breadth of her influence, like you said, is still felt today in many ways. A lot of like what we've been talking about with New Age ideas basically started with her. But yeah, she was this. She was born in, I believe, what is now the Ukraine. What was the former Russia,
Soviet Union?
Yeah. Well, the Tsarist Russia, and so she grew up in the 1840s, 1850s. There, she married young to a old man named Blavatsky, and that's how she got her name. And then she just ran off. She ran off from her husband and just spent the next 20 years wandering the earth, and creating this like just ginormous backstory, mystical backstory to her life, where she was. So part of it is she went into Tibet and learned Tibetan Buddhism from masters up there in Tibet, and she was learning from secret books and written in secret languages up there. And so then this was at the time when Tibet was completely shut off to Westerners. It was just dangerous to get into there because there was a lot of apparently bandits in the Himalayan foothills. But there was also just culturally, they just would not allow Westerners in, but she was one of the few, I guess they did allow in, if it was true or not.
That's the question, isn't it?
That's the large one. Is it like true or not? And then she just shows up in New York in the 1870s, New York City. Yeah. And she just like explodes onto the scene. And she creates, her and her buddy, Henry Still Alcott, co-created the Theosophical Society. And when it wasn't getting traction here in America, they kind of just upped and moved it over to India. And then it was really in India where it kind of like exploded and became this just alternative, I like alternative like theories, just massively influential in India too, because the people who came after Blavatsky, like especially Annie Besant, they would go on to like help the Indian home rule movement and things like that, really be leaders in that movement. And Henry Stowe Alcott is still like revered in Sri Lanka because he helped reestablish Buddhist schools there, and really bringing that culture that had been lost to British and the Empire, really helping that come out too. So they actually did some good things. It might be fall under like maybe its own kind of imperialism or patriarchal, but they just did some positive things. But Blavatsky herself would write, really, she would do a whole lot of writing, but she wrote two main books, Isis Unveiled, which is kind of her first book that she wrote, which was like her like mythologizing herself almost in her ideas. And then she wrote the Secret Doctrine, which is basically this ginormous 2-volume 1,500-page work that just gets into the nitty gritty of her worldviews. And so she goes into like her own spiritual cosmology of the universe, and then she will also go into her own spiritual evolution too. So it was written at a time when um, the ideas of Darwin were being bandied about in the scientific world, and so she decided she needed to throw her 2 cents in, and then so that was basically where the Secret Doctrine comes from, is her doing that, and that's where she throws in Lemuria and throws in Atlantis as part of her spiritual evolutionary ideas.
And the interesting, she talks a bit. I mean, and I've always wanted to do a show on this as well, because this seems like the real one of the cruxes of her work being misused or interpreted correctly. God knows how you look at it. Really, it's her idea of root races, and I found that because this is where it. Yeah, I mean, this caused a lot of things to happen. This in this particular theory. I mean, World War II, for example. Well, not partially World War II, but you know what I mean. But let's talk about the root races, because that also plays into Lemuria quite heavily, doesn't it? And
So Lemuria was where the third root race took hold and kind of evolved on Lemuria. And so
what was the first two? Let's go through the root, because it's like 6, isn't there?
You're testing me now. Okay, so there's I think there's 7 root races.
Oh, 7! Wow.
Total. I think we're in the 6th right now, and the 7th is
7 tends to be the number, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then 7 stages and 7, yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's 7 sub-root races within the major root race, and so it's
it can get a bit complicated actually.
And it's just turtles all the way down there. And so the first root race, so we were all just gaseous spirit forms to go. So the first root race here on Earth, we were just these spirit forms, just ideas basically, and that evolved into more, I guess, gaseous forms, and that was taking place on Hyperborea.
Hyperborea.
Hyperborea. Yeah. Well, Plato talks about that in the Symposium. Yeah, he's so he gets lots of ticks with Atlantis and Hyperborea. Yeah, so there's that's I guess mentioned as well.
Yeah, so that's where the second root race is living. I don't know how it's living there, because it's a bunch of gases, and then it takes shape on the third root race. Like, it actually physicalizes into a physical being on the third root race, and that takes place on Lemuria. And so, and she's also doing this all in a spiritual sense as well. So we have this actual physical evolution going on, but there's also a spiritual evolution of man going through these stages and getting some sort of spiritual awakening as they're going through. And so it's in Lemuria during the third root race that this massive physical evolution is taking place. So we start off as these giant beings, Cyclops, I think she calls us. We have just one eye. Throughout the Lemuria, we evolve into 2 eyes, but we also have our third eye is developed on our heads as well. And then we slowly start shrinking down too.
I think that third eye becomes the pineal gland, doesn't it? I think that's what she says. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So then, go on.
I was going to say, and then it was also, she does an interesting thing where she cites her sources throughout the Secret Doctrine. And she's only saying this is happening on Lemuria just because other people before her have called it Lemuria. So she's just using the terminology that Schlater brought up and Heichel used as well. And so that was very interesting. And so people after that never really bring that up as a concept. They just take Lemuria as fact, where she actually has that little wiggle room there. But at the end of the third root race, we're almost quite human, and then Lemuria disappears, and we move on to the fourth root race, which takes place in Atlantis.
Yeah, and then this is where the Aryans come in, isn't it? Around here, I believe. Yeah, which is what I was kind of alluding to earlier, and obviously that concept gets picked up and run by a completely different group.
Right.
Yeah, so it's it's kind of interesting. She has this is there something kind of circular about her theory as well, isn't there? It's I'm trying to think. Yeah, it's kind of, it's interesting. It's because where does the America stuff come in essentially? Like, because at some point there's an America being the final kind of like where the Aryans will take root and be the new super race, as it were.
I think that comes a bit later though.
Yeah. So I think we're currently technically in the fifth root race. The sixth root race is the American race. And that's like we're getting ready for the final awakening, and then the seventh root race is actually Lemuria is arisen again, and we become fully enlightened beings once again, where we like kind of complete the circle and go back to our natural, just pure spiritual selves. Like what happened.
Back to the gas.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very curious. I mean, it's a curious narrative in the sense that we have a woman from Russia essentially, and then she's sort of like focusing everything on America. That's curious, but I suppose it was like a kind of coming together of all different races and peoples at the time, a big melting pot of different races. Maybe that was part of her thinking. I don't know.
Maybe, but she also go on.
I was gonna say, I have no idea why, but maybe, just
I mean, she doesn't say Russia. She does. I mean, that would make more sense, wouldn't it? And it's but like you were saying, like Atlantis somehow ends up in Sweden. It's like Atlantis / Lemuria. Like Atlantis is everywhere apart from the Atlantic somehow. It's like it's like somehow it's like this moving feast. It's like well, and like Lemuria, similar sort of, where does it, the new Lemuria is like America, which is curious. I suppose, I don't know. Maybe it's all this. I don't know. Maybe she saw it as like the forefront of a cultural and changes as well. I honestly don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. But she also wasn't too keen on indigenous races either.
She absolutely, I would say, just despised them. I don't know if despised, but she just thought they were a sub race whatsoever. So she was very racist in that sense.
Yeah, and you can really see in a lot of modern day groups, you can see how Blavatsky appeals to them with that kind of stuff as well. So in a way, you can almost see where that kind of right or extremism or whatever crosses over with the New Age. I'll call it the New Age because I don't like to lump in our occultism with that. But
that's our prejudices.
Yeah, that's our prejudice. Okay, but no, you can really see from reading early these Blavatsky books, like why it was picked up by the Nazis, for example, and why it's still being picked up to this day and being used as a kind of a proof of white superiority, essentially. And it's strange that more people haven't written about that, actually.
Well, she put forth the idea of like basically man being its own god too, and so it was one of the first times that's happening, and so that was a powerful idea of people just having that belief in themselves that they can ascend to such heights and be that change for themselves. And I think that's one of the most influential things and strongest things that are still around today.
I mean, it's in Brahma yoga, so the idea that you are, God isn't not some, I am that and thou art that and that am I. That's essentially, that idea of God within. I mean, that as well. I mean, and also to play the devil's advocate a little bit, I mean, and she was a woman and she spoke out against the orthodoxies of her time, which was pretty a brave thing to do, and to pull it off to the extent she did, in that cultural climate. The Church of England, I don't think were particularly pleased about her, but it's curious. It's a curious thing, is it? Yeah. She made life more interesting. And for good and like you say, for good and bad.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to say, you bring up the Brahmin yoga thing, and she was one of the first Westerners to bring forth these Eastern religions and Eastern ideas to a more widespread Western audience as well, too. So
we're talking about that earlier.
Me and Ken argue about this a lot. We're going to do it now. But you're right. So with the imperialist sort of narrative, it's like we're going to India and we're going to enlighten the benighted savages, the heathen savages, and with the white man's God and the white man's science and the white man's civilization. But a twist, like all good stories, there's a twist in the end, and the twist in is that it was more like a cross-pollinization in a way that people never anticipated. People never anticipated that, and the creation of Theosophic Society is not the cause of that, but it's an expression of that. It's a symptom of that. Actually.
Yeah. I would say it's just the almost antithesis of that. Like they were basically co-opting those ideas and using it for, I mean, maybe some altruistic reasons, but maybe some selfish reasons as well.
A bit of both. I mean, obviously, they're like I was saying, we're all situated. They were situated. So there's a lens, there's a filter they see things through, and so that sort of taints things. So it's not a pure selfless thing. But given the time, and if there's people, I mean, it's rare now, but there's people, there's members of the clergy who object to yoga being taught in church halls. That still happens. Still happens. In America, there's the evangelical right who demonize Hinduism, and every single god is a false idol and is the work of the devil. That still happens, and and they were a challenge to that.
Yeah, true.
And that narrative is still very real for some people.
Yeah.
What I was going to say, writing this book, I always it was really interesting how people's motivations play into it. Like, you can clearly see people's motive. A lot of it's just money and power and things like that. But with Blavatsky, I never got a clear sense of really what her motivation was. And so that at least leads me to believe that it was more true to just what she was saying too. So I found that interesting.
Moving on from Blavatsky, we have two other really interesting theosophists, which is Annie Besant and Charles Ledbetter. Should we talk about? I think we can all agree Ledbetter was not a great character.
I'm sure it's pronounced Ledbetter, but I might be wrong there. But
anyway, so let's talk a little bit about those two because they sort of move on the Lemurian theory. They sort of move it into more fantastical realms, don't they?
Yeah, they really make it weird. So if it Cyclops and all of that weren't weird enough, Besant and Leadbeater really kind of weirded up Lemuria, and so they were an interesting pair. Annie Besant was a really fascinating woman. And you should do a show on her just because of her lifespan, such a wide breadth, and had such influence on so many different things. But for some reason, she couldn't quit Charles Leadbeater, who was just a serial child molester, basically. Very they had strong evidence to that as well. But she wouldn't kick him out of the Theosophical Society, especially when she became president. And it actually seems like when she
reinstated him, didn't she?
Yeah, it was when she was, that was her campaign, her platform was if make me president and I'll just reinstate this dude. And so what the two would do they would do these things. They would get together and just project themselves back into the past. almost like past life regressions, but they were kind of just like astral projecting themselves back. And so they would do it like almost as like a party trick, and just go back and like do these like life histories about like Marie Antoinette or just other, people from history. But they did that with Lemuria as well. And so they were kind of looking at Blavatsky's root races. And so they projected themselves back into the time of Lemuria, and they wrote about what they saw there. And so what they saw were these beings from the Mars and the moon coming down in wicker baskets and basically teaching humanity civilization. So it's like a very much a ancient alien kind of seeding civilization here on Earth. And they were coming down, and like they were fighting gelatinous beings. There were dinosaurs like they had to like combat and stuff like that. And so people were going back and forth between the moon and Mars and Earth. And so it was just really, really strange, and just like completely dense as well. So if you try to read their book, Man, Whence, Whither, Where, or whatever it was called, it is like incomprehensible. And it's like talking of different moon cycles and just races and everything else going on. So is very, very strange book, but it really solidified Lemuria as this strange spiritual place.
And did they call it like basket works or something like that? That's right.
Yeah, I didn't understand that when I was reading it. To be honest with you.
I did not understand it reading it either. So
yeah. So it's interesting. The Cyclops comes up again, because in the original Hyperborea tale, the cave beyond the North Wind, there's a race of Cyclopean creatures and who fight griffins. So you can see, and in Hyperborea there are androgynous creatures, both male and female. They're androgynous. They're like primordial. It's like Eden. Eden.
And that's Blavatsky.
Yeah, she
spoke
talked
about that as well, didn't she?
And it's very much like that. And and that's and then they get divided in half to weaken them. So there's a male side and a female side, and they're separated. So that androgynous kind of thing going on is that in an early cases of and also like the asexual reproduction, which in earlier, it's more primitive quotation marks creatures still is a thing, isn't it? It does goes on. So there we are.
And then after those two, we then move on to someone who's locally influential still to this day for us anyways, Rudolf Steiner. And he's obviously we have members of this podcast not present currently that went to Steiner schools. So there's still, he's very much but he's very different to the other theosophists in many ways. And let's talk a bit about Rudolf Steiner, because again, the character we've not really mentioned on the show yet, somehow 100 odd episodes in. But let's talk about Steiner and his Lemurian education.
Yeah, so this is like a good example of imparting on Lemuria the things that you're interested in. And so Steiner himself was interested in education and farming and all that. And so that's exactly what gets brought up when he talks about Lemuria too. And so Steiner was a fascinating guy. He broke with the Theosophical Society over Leadbeater and Besant, and kind of created his own organization, the Anthroposophical Society. And very well, like the Waldorf schools are still around, and I think more prevalent in Europe. But they do
very well, apparently. Yeah.
And he created biodynamic farming, which is still a very much a practice going on in agriculture. And he also created one of the first natural cosmetics companies as well, which is still around and kicking too. So very influential in the 20th century and beyond guy too. And so his Lemuria, looking back at it, very much the same. This just where kind of man evolved into more civilized places. But it was just he goes hard into the educational system of Lemuria and how boys and girls were educated separately, and what was more taught for the different ones, like more, I guess, physical education and warlike education for the boys, more super empathy education for the females. And then he also gets into like just Lemurians having these like Jedi like powers where they can move stone objects with their mind and communicate over long distances with one another too.
I often wonder if the Jedi came from some kind of, because I know Lucas was obsessed with mythology.
Mm-hmm.
I often wonder if there's some kind of Lemurian influence over the Jedi and that sort of thing. Quite
Like
possible.
when I was reading it, that's like the notes I was taking. I was like, man, this screams like Jedi's to me.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So this is sort of around the time where we have James Churchward appears, and we start talking about Lemuria as Mu instead. And again, that's another Gaia classic. If you go on Gaia and type in Mu, you'll find hundreds of episodes about. So it's still a very used term. So let's talk about Mu and. Was it M? I don't know. It's one of these words where I think it's pronounced in strange ways, isn't it?
Yeah. So I would say Mu. Yeah.
Lemuria. It's like the middle bit of the word, isn't it? It's sort of like I don't know. Yeah, maybe for some reason he wanted to show away. Well, it sounds almost. I don't think this was it. It was like a kind of. Sort of. He didn't have like the copyright on the word Lemuria, so I just use the word the middle bit, and people will, with a wink to the audience, and they will know. They would know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so like let's talk a bit about Let's talk a bit about Churchward and Mu and how that all came about.
Yeah, so like he really went all into creating like a real Lemuria, like finding an actual Lemuria, like Donnelly did for Atlantis, and trying to create these connections to locate an actual Atlantis. Churchward was doing the same thing to try to find, the location for his lost continent in the Pacific, which he called Mu. And so he was doing all of these like reviewing Pacific Islander hieroglyphs, comparing them with Egyptian hieroglyphs, and doing all this kind of like cultural diffusionist studies and analysis. And that's how he basically came up with his creation of Mu. He was a fascinating guy too. He was very much influenced by the esoteric archaeologists, the Leplangians, who were doing archaeological excavations down in Mexico, and they were uncovering some, Incan and Aztec artifacts down there, and from those they came up with their idea of this legend of Queen Mu. So that's Moo with like an accent mark on one of the O's there. And so this whole story of like this Queen Mu and how she, her husband died and her brother tried to marry her, and so she had to escape. She escaped across Atlantis into Egypt. And then came back again, and kind of created this whole idea. But from that, Churchward gets his idea of there being a Mu out in the Pacific Ocean, and it really, it's still like you said, Gaia it's still very much like a part of this alternative ideologies going around, and so. It's
interesting which ones stick, isn't it? It's interesting which
really is.
Yeah, sort of. I'd love to map out all these kind of current kind of belief systems and sort of see which where they will root from and why it is that each one of them stuck. I find it all really fascinating, that kind of the psychology behind it, I guess, and the it's I guess it's just a fascinating kind of thing to look at. But one of my favorite parts of the book, because I've looked into this myself a couple of times, is Frederick Spencer Oliver and Philos. It's such a fantastic story. Let's talk a bit about Frederick Spencer Oliver and Philos the esotericist. That's my favorite part as well, just learning more about his life. And
it's tragic in a sense, I guess, but also like maybe of his own making and his own devising as well. So Frederick Spencer Oliver was I guess, wannabe cult leader in the 1880s, 1890s California. And so his story goes, he was a teenager living and working for his dad, doing some surveying up around Mount Shasta in Northern California. And so as he's writing down some notes, this just spirit just takes over his body and starts writing down, almost like automatic writing. And he gets freaked out, goes home. And then like over the next couple of days and weeks, Philos makes himself known to him. And so Philos is this spirit being that just appears to him and just basically like almost channeling. He was almost like channeling Philos and telling him this very esoteric Christian, like, ideas and beliefs, and imparting that. And so, slowly he introduces Philos to his parents, and he introduces Philos to like the surrounding community. And like, people would show up on the weekend and hear Frederick, basically channel Philos to these people. And then Philos came to him and was like, I want you to write a book. So he goes through this process of writing this book, A Dweller on Two Planets, but Frederick couldn't get it published in his lifetime. And so he sicked some of his followers on it. And so they would go around and like have these schemes about trying to get the book published. Apparently a copy of the book was sent to New York, and it was involved in a train derailment and lost. And so it was just like obstacle after obstacle just would not let this book be published. And then he would eventually die in 1899, but that was only after he fell in love with a jailed prostitute who killed her husband in Los Angeles. And so that was basically a prophecy that he foretold in A Dweller on Two Planets. And so he made that connection himself. And so he went really hard after this woman to try to, like, I guess, provide the proof that A Dweller on Two Planets was coming to life. And so, yeah, and A Dweller on Two Planets is this really just not fun book to read, but it tells the story. It's a story in two parts. So it tells the story. The first part is basically a brooding Atlantean nobleman who gets into a love triangle with these two women. They get into a fight. One turns the other into a statue. Then the other one kills herself, and then he kind of like just broods on his spaceship / submarine. And then he dies, learns some lessons along the way, and he gets reincarnated as Walter Pearson. So I don't know how you go from a Atlantean nobleman to Walter Pearson, but yeah, Walter Pearson was actually born in Washington, D.C., served in the Civil War, and then moved out to California, and it has a lot of similarities with Frederick's dad as well. So like a lot of like that early Walter backstory is basically the backstory of Frederick's father. And so, yeah, he strikes it rich in California, and then he meets this Chinese spiritual master on the banks, on the slopes of Mount Shasta. And so, and as they're palling around, they meet this like disgraced prostitute, sex worker in California, and they kind of set her on the right path. And so that's where his story with finding that prostitute comes in. But back to the Dweller on Two Planets, the Chinese master brings Frederick into Mount Shasta. He unlocks a door, and they go down deep into it, and then he astrally projects him to Venus, and there he meets Philo. He actually gets turned into Philos in the mountain and gets beamed up to Venus, and they have like a magical mystery tour where he learns the secrets of this esoteric Christianity, meanings and stuff like that. But So that's the book. It sounds exciting and all that, but it's not really. So it doesn't get published until 6 years after his death, and it's all his mom's doing. His mom was really hard on getting the book published, and even then, it wasn't until another 20 years after that, where the second edition comes out, that it really like takes hold and people start noticing it.
Yeah, you sort of. If only GoFundMe had existed around then, he would. Maybe he would have got it out a bit earlier, but.
And they did try. His literary agent slash lawyer went to the Santa Barbara government and was like, "Why don't you place some ads in my book to help fund the publication of this book?" But they didn't. They didn't go for that.
No, it's interesting because there's definite links, isn't there, between like Philo's story and kind of Shaver's story later on. There's this kind of and Mount Shasta itself is, I don't know, have you been to Mount Shasta recently? Is it still this kind of hotbed of it still is it? Okay,
Yes, it is.
interesting.
Yeah, it's very much a still like only like second to Sedona here in America for alternative spirituality.
Again, it's one of those places I want to sort of go and do a report on. I just want to sit. I imagine it's this place where, I don't know, in my mind anyway, because I've read a lot about Mount Shasta over the years. I was imagining it being this sort of hotbed of like New Age fairs and kind of strange cults around every corner. We have a town here in England called East Grinstead that is very similar. It's also where Scientology is based in the UK.
Okay.
It's
Wow.
But then there was a Rosicrucian group there. There was there's whole I think there's a book actually on it, but there's many articles online about the kind of weirdness of East Grinstead. It's one of the ley line areas, so I kind of imagine Mount Shasta being a much bigger mountainous version of East Grinstead in my mind for some reason. But,
Definitely.
But
more glamorous.
Yeah, definitely more glamorous than East Grinstead.
Slightly more glamorous.
But yeah, if you ever watch the film The Master,
okay, yeah.
the bits that are based in England are clearly based on Hubbard in East Grinstead. It's interesting. But yeah, so there's also an Amorc link to Lemuria, which really surprised me. I didn't actually realize, talking about Rosicrucians. So yeah, let's talk about, because that's also linked into Mount Shasta as well, isn't it? So let's talk about Amorc, because we were talking about Amorc in our last episode as well. Interesting.
Oh, cool. Okay, yeah. So that Amorc was the ones that brought Lemuria to Mount Shasta in America. They were the ones that solidified it inside of Mount Shasta. It's never really left there. People now believe that there's still Lemurians in Mount Shasta. And so yeah, Amorc was created by a dude named Harvey Spencer Lewis. He went over to France, the story goes, and he was initiated into Rosicrucianism there, and he brought it back to America and created Amorc. And it kind of bounced around and then finally settled in San Jose, I believe, in California. And then and that was around in the 1920s, and then in the early 1930s, he wrote a book under the pseudonym Wishar Spinlay Survey, which is just like an anagram of his name, of Lemuria, Lost Continent of the Pacific. And that's where he lays out his idea that the east coast of Lemuria is actually the west coast of the United States. And so when Lemuria sunk, it left itself in California, and surviving members of the Lemurian race moved into Mount Shasta, and you can still see it. Like then he talks about all these weird sightings and reportings going on around Mount Shasta. So there was this Californian-based astronomer who was at an observatory. He was witnessing these weird parties going on Mount Shasta, weird buildings and all this kind of stuff. There was just like really strange Lemurian sightings, like in the towns, like these basically tall whites, Nordic looking people coming into town and acting really strange. and just a bunch of general strangeness. But this kicked off this whole like golden age of like weird Mount Shasta, and that's kind of never really went away.
I don't know if you ever see, there was a film made by Poke Runyon. He's an occultist in California, quite a well-regarded one. But I think it's called Beyond Lemuria, and it's a very low-budget film, but it's based at Mount Shasta, and it has Lemurians involved, and Darrow, I think, are in it, and so it kind of weaves in all these different Lemurian. I'll send you a link to it if you haven't seen it.
That's the first time I became aware of the Mount Shasta. First time I became aware of it. I mean, in the Rosicrucian narrative, there's the Agnes, the holy mountain there, isn't there? So I suppose it's a sort of similar. And mountains often, the Hebrew Testament is full of mountains. The holy mountain is not something a completely new thing. It's obviously a bit of a trope.
Yeah, one thing I found really interesting in the book as well was if you sort of look at Blavatsky as kind of the antidote to Christianity in some ways. She's presenting an alternative spiritual system to Christianity. But what was really interesting is that the Christians, or certain Christians, took back Lemuria from her in a way, didn't they?
They did.
Yeah. So can we talk a bit about the kind of Christianization of Lemuria as well?
It's really strange, like especially with someone like Frederick Spencer Oliver, who was like this. He was very much into, like, he was married by the Universalist or Unitarians. Like, he was married in the Unitarian Church, so that leads me to believe that he had some ties to Unitarianism, and so this just whole idea of like Christ-like figures going into Lemuria and just being a part of the thing. I think it's, and then also you have, especially someone like Guy Ballard, who comes after Spencer Oliver, and the whole basically co-ops everything, just steals. I don't want to say co-op is a nice word, but steals is more appropriate for what he does. But yeah, he basically, in his kind of like right-wing religious marriage in the 1930s, like he creates himself as like this like spiritual master on par with Jesus, and so he's like bringing it into like the Christianity beliefs and into it as well, and using it to prop up his ideas and put himself forward as this kind of another ascended master. And so, and then that's I get that sense a lot, especially in like the people who believe in Lemuria and put it forward as an actual place. There's always spiritual or ascended masters involved, and there's like this whole lineup of them, and Jesus becomes part of that too. So he's just one of the bench players.
I am that links Camp Saint Germain to Jesus, isn't it? So they basically say that they're of the same level, but kind of, it's kind of confusing there because their kind of whole theology kind of changes, doesn't it, over time, the I am stuff. So it sort of starts off very theosophical and ends very Nazi, I guess, to put it, I mean, it really does. I mean, it's is the Silver Shirts involved with them in some way, or is it? No, I'm getting mixed up with another group there. But
no, you're right. So the Silver Shirts are, what was the guy's name? Pelly's organization here in America, the fascist organization. And when he was in prison for, I think, basically like conspiracy to overthrow the government or something along those lines, there was like a fracturing of his organization. And so the IM movement kind of swooped in and co-opted some of those ideas just to pull the Silver Shirts in. And so they created their own like hardline group within their organization. I think they're called the Minutemen.
That's it.
Yeah. And so you have that going on with the IM activity movement and that.
Yeah, they're still around in some form, aren't they?
They're still in Mount Shasta. They have their own like reading room in Mount Shasta. They still put on like this very strange and elaborate, Christian origin story, like the Christ's birth story, and like just pageantry. It's like the Christian pageant. You should watch videos of it. It's really, they go all out.
So I guess coming to a close in a way, where are we now with Lemuria in terms of, obviously I've spoken a little bit about Gaia, but if we, if one was to go out into the world now, where would they find, what would they make of Lemuria, I suppose?
Well, I will say I actually found one. So I have a Lemurian seed crystal right here. I was actually able to find one that was actually labeled a seed crystal.
Wow.
So so I think that's the biggest influence now that Lemuria has, is in this kind of alternative thinking around crystals. It also just seems to be a spice that gets added to a lot of people's backgrounds to just give them some, I guess, street cred in the thinking. So recently there was the Love Has Won cult that
go on. Sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No, you're fine.
I'm pointing at Ken because we were just looking at something about
we
that.
were watching the video of I've forgotten the name of the leader of that now.
Amy God. Carlson.
So there's a body cam footage of her being discovered by the police, wasn't there? That was released.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of horrifying, actually.
It really is, and but like part of her backstory is that she was a Lemurian queen at one point in her life, and so you see Lemuria pop up in places like that, just people as being just like as part of their backstory. And also it's a especially if you go on like right wing places and message boards, Lemuria is often depicted as what happens when its destruction, particularly, is what happens when you allow wokeness into society and it destroys a whole civilization. Like, this is what happens when you allow science to rule, and it completely destroys the spiritual paradise of Lemuria. And so it becomes an example that way.
And science and like sort of fantasy science fiction. There's Lovecraftian version of Lemuria, and there's and also like there's a Conan, and then Hyperborean Age, the Steely Thewed Conan. There's those Lemurian motives, and Linkata as well. Actually, I got this from one of the things which it sort of made sense to me now. In Linkata, there's a whole Fangor of Lemuria is one of these sort of these hairy barbarian types, and there's bits in it with like these sort of machines, these vehicles that fly and stuff like this. I remember thinking, well, this is more like science fiction than sword and sorcery, but that goes back to the Phylos, because because they have this sort of unidentified flying object and an unidentified submergible object as well, because it's a submarine that flies. And then in Japan, there's a film called Artagon or something like that, where there's a Japanese colonel or general who wants to regain the honor of Japan by taking one of these flying super weapons from Lemuria, which flies and goes underwater and so on, to win back. To win Second World War, basically, to get back Japan's honor, for losing the war. So it's interesting. It all feeds in. It's like this. It's been a rich, hotbed of all these, like, it's like a barrel of eels, Lemuria, isn't it? And in some ways, quite literally. But it's like a big compost heap of with all these strange growths of sort of emerge, fertile ground, if nothing else.
Well, I think that's the power of Lemuria, is like its blankness is you put anything you want onto it, and so that's kind of what has made it such a fertile ground for people's stories and for throughout the time, even more so than Atlantis, which is kind of still confined by Plato's original definition of it, but Lemuria has no definition, so you can go hog wild with it as much as you want.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And then the idea of an advanced civilization that brought low. I mean, that's like an archetype that seems to repeat itself. I mean, in the flood narratives. I mean, there's in flood mythology, there's like a version of that in Australia. It's so ubiquitous that sober commenters have suggested that it's some kind of cultural memory from the flood, which would make it millions of years old. But in Durham University, they did a study of Grimm's fairy tales, and they believe that the basic narrative framework of stories like Red Riding Hood and Jack the Giant Killer are something like 4,000, 5,000 years old. I mean, obviously, people won't sit around talking about Jack the Giant Killer and calling, someone called Jack. But the idea of a hero goes to fight the monster to get the treasure and bring it back. Those are very basic narratives are, repeated, very archetypal, very Jungian in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well, that's like the Gilgamesh epic too. Like this.
Absolutely. Oh,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I mean that's got an Eden, isn't it? There's an Eden and a fallen humanity in that, and obviously that's in Genesis. Sodom and Gomorrah is like a similar sort of thing, isn't it? And there's lots of different versions of that.
Yeah. So if people want to find you online, where would they look?
Well, they can find me. I am on, I guess, Instagram mostly. Justin Loves History, and the book's out there. You can find that. I have a website, justinjmchenry.com. I'm not really into like promoting myself so much. I don't know if my publisher likes that, so it's hard for me to put myself out there, I guess.
You've done it now. I mean, it's a great fun read. It's a very fertile read as well.
And we barely covered half of the characters. I mean, there's so many characters, interesting characters.
It's a subject that gives and gives, and it was great. It's very entertaining. It's a very entertaining read, and and then you can come up with your own version of Lemuria, which I'm hoping to do.
So we're going to base it here in Brighton, off the coast of Brighton.
Well, why not? We got the sea. It'd be silly to waste it. We might,
might be writing a sequel about Marck as the cult leader soon. At some point.
No sex, please, with Lemurian.
Anyway, thank you so much for coming on the show, and hopefully we'll speak to you again at some point in the future.
Yeah, I would love that. Thank you, guys.